Yeah. So listen, thanks a million for doing this, first of all. Your episode 100, which is
Ah.
a number I never thought I'd get to. Yeah, I decided to be self-indulgent for episode 100 because I kind of I pick people to have on that I think are either well known or deserve to be well known. And then you were kind of my introduction to CrossFit
Oh,
when,
really?
yeah, so I actually have a couple of stories, but when I kind of didn't realize I was doing CrossFit when I started doing CrossFit. It was just a normal, not a global gym, but like a functional fitness gym. And then it was kind of like, oh, but we're doing this thing called the Open. And I was like, oh, it's the Open. And they're like, oh, it's CrossFit. And I was like, oh, not that fucking shit that everyone's always talking about. But then I started kind of watching it and stuff. And you and Alex Smith stood out to me. I still don't really know why. I think the main reason I was drawn to you, I think, was because I was like, why the fuck is that guy so much taller than everyone else? Like, this is like, you literally stood out. And then I think Alex Smith, because he looked like he was like 7. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I don't know. I've loved the two of you since. And we actually met, you and I met at the games. Like, it was the day after you got cut. You, Annie, and Brent, or you, Annie, and Pat did a thing with Reebok, like a coaching
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
thing. Yeah, and we met at that. And you actually also, it's going to sound like I'm stalking you now, but you actually
Uh,
also sent a video to me to show to my wife, to tell her that I was bringing her to the games that year. I can't remember the girl's name. It's someone with the Professor Project.
oh,
Uh,
like Kelsey?
Yes, that's it. Yeah, I thought Kelly, but yeah,
Yeah.
that was lost. She arranged it, but yeah. So
Oh,
we've
cool.
it's a weird full circle moment for me, and probably just a weird moment for you, hearing all that back.
No, I mean, congratulations on 100. Like you said, you didn't expect to get this far, but yeah, not a lot of podcasts make it to 100. I mean, podcasts are a funny thing. It's like, it takes 2 years, right? Like, it's kind of like, it's the same with most things. It's like, if you want something to grow and gain like a bit of a following and a reputation and whatever, whether that's a restaurant or a podcast or a brand, it's like it usually takes about 2 years.
Hmm.
And so, how long have you been doing this?
A year and a couple of months, but I
Okay,
think
yeah. So,
it was kind of sped up. It was like fast forward because of COVID and stuff, because I got access to
mm,
people that I shouldn't have had. Like,
right,
I
you had
remember
nothing else to do.
like last March, I was chatting to Pat, and I hadn't had anybody really that big on, and he agreed to do it because he had fuck all else to do. He was just like, yeah, grand, I've got like literally unending time to do nothing, so that's fine. And then
Right.
I think that opens up doors where people are like, oh, you had him on or you had her on, and it kind of, I think it sped up. It gained me, I think I skipped about 8 months because of that. And
Mm,
because I had so much time myself to be like, oh, I'll just spend 3 hours networking or doing this or doing that or whatever. Whereas usually I'd be like at work and would, be squeezing it in the evening. So
yeah.
yeah.
Is this the podcast we're recording?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Which is fine. I'm used to. I'm used to. Now I'm like, did I say any? Like, did I swear? Because I usually try not to swear. That's fine. It's very natural conversation. Not that I'm all of a sudden going to put on some facade, but usually in the podcast, maybe this is something for 101. Moving onwards, there's usually a moment of like, you come on, you record, you say, all right, is there anything we don't want to talk about? All right, and here we go. My name is Brent Fikowski, and podcast 100, Brent Fikowski. I guess you'll probably add that in after,
Yeah.
but
Well, now
that's like what
I'm
I'm
not.
used.
I'm just gonna edit that bit that you just said and put that in instead of my usual introduction.
I guess it's more what I'm used to. So I was like, oh, this is good. And I'm like, all right, when are we gonna like start the podcast? And I'm like, Brent, you're in the podcast. This is
Yeah.
happening.
No, I think
I'm sure it's fine.
no, like, well, I've gotten this far with it, but I think it kind of stops people getting too guarded as well. Like, obviously, like I said to you, it's not gotcha. I'm
Good
not
word.
going to be like, oh, I tricked him into,
No.
saying something he regretted. Like, everyone that comes on has the editorial privilege afterwards. But I think I feel like if I was on a podcast and someone did that to me, like, was like, I introducing themselves and me, I'd be a bit more like, oh shit, okay, here we go. Like, like more nervous
Yeah,
or
and I
something.
mean, that's our, yeah. We all have our we're all a little different person in different scenarios, as much as we care to not be. We all have different, whether it's like you're going to obviously talk different to your grandma than your buddies from college. So it's just not that you're different people, you're just different person when you need to be. But anyway, okay,
Yeah.
we're in. Good to be here. Thank you, Coffee Pods and Wads. Brent Fikowski, 5 times gains half. All right, let's do it.
Geez, you get your idol on and he just slates your interview technique from the get-go. It's hard. Well, listen, what I was curious, like, is coffee something that you drink, or like, because you seem very like 1% orientated, as in like what's going to get me that extra little bit.
Yeah.
Like we talked about your flow tanks and stuff before, and I know you're like, do you drink bone broth in the morning or do you have coffee?
I don't really drink coffee. Sorry. I don't. Am I your first podcast guest? I'm not.
No, I've had plenty. Yeah.
I remember thinking when when I agreed to do the podcast, I was like, oh, I'm sure that'll be a talking point. Coffee. No, I would hope so. No, I don't drink. My wife drinks coffee. I actually kind of like the taste now. I obviously, when you're younger, you don't really. It's just kind of too bitter. But it's just more. I just save the caffeine for when I need it. Right. Yeah. So as far as like, pre-workout, which has caffeine in it, or caffeine, I really only have it on like really important training days or on competition, because then it does more. Because if you're just always taking, 50 milligrams or 75 milligrams every day, it still lifts you up a bit, but it starts to do less. And then you need like 200 to really lift you up. And I've just read some studies on it. So yeah, it's more just like a 1% orientation. I like the taste, and obviously like I like caffeine, but yeah, so I don't really drink it regularly.
So Zevia is your caffeine source outside of like hardcore pre-workouts.
Well, I've got an Ascent pre-workout, and there's nothing really hardcore like pre-workout stuff that I'm really into, because any like hardcore pre-workout, really, it's if you look at like the crazy ones, like what's the one that people used to take that like there isn't around anymore?
The ones with like skulls on it and shit.
Yeah, but that stuff's just like 300 milligrams of caffeine, right? Like that's what. And then there's a few ingredients that get you
the itchy
that
skin
can potentially. Well, that's beta alanine, which I sometimes take. I'm not taking it right now because I just was getting sick of the. But and then sometimes there's stuff in the hardcore pre-workouts that like vasodilates, so it like can potentially give you a pump, right? Like allow more blood in, and that doesn't really make any sense for CrossFit. And really and then there might be a couple like androgens and like Chinese herbal medicine stuff that will again make you a little more alert, which some of that stuff has some really good properties, but really the hardcore pre-workouts, there's just a lot of caffeine, like a lot, like more than they should, you should have in a scoop, but it works,
Yeah, I don't know if you watched The Office, but when you said about the Chinese herbs, I just thought of ground seahorses. That's all I was picturing after that.
Oh, I haven't seen. I've seen some of The Office, but I haven't seen. I'm not like a diehard Office guy.
That's fair. I usually ask about a coffee memory then from guests, so I guess I should switch that a little bit to more of a travel based one. You've obviously like seen a lot of the world, like places that a lot of people might never get to go to, like with China and Dubai and places like that. Is there anything that stands out as like a standout memory that you think you'll always look back on?
Oh man, yeah, I think there's plenty. I mean, I've had a pretty good run so far. There's definitely, I'd like to do more travel. It's this hard balance between, like trying to say yes to every opportunity that you have, and then also, really focusing on like the 1% and making sure you're focusing on training. I did a podcast a couple of weeks ago with Talking Elite Fitness, and kind of got into that a little bit without talking about travel, but it's like, yeah, I'd love to go, do a thing, but then it's like, well, you're missing, potentially 3 weeks of solid training, to do a 4-day thing in whatever, some place. But I went to Portugal after the games in 2018, which was a lot of fun. Got to see Lisbon, Portugal, which was really nice, and was kind of more in the off season, so I wasn't training quite as much. And my wife and I just got to enjoy the city and had some really good gelato, and and just ate a little, like was a little less particular about how I was eating. And then we went to London for a bit as well, which was really nice. Got to see like the Wit, downtown London, which was great. And then our two experiences going to the east, or I guess west, which was Dubai on one trip, and then Shanghai in the other one. And those were both really cool. I think Shanghai was kind of unique because I don't think I'd ever would have went there for like a trip. You know, it's like where you want to go for vacation. You probably still wouldn't, maybe not against anyone who lives in Shanghai, but like recommend it. It's not like a super touristy place, but because of that, you just really kind of, you were in it, you know, you were with people that just were living, as opposed to being in like a tourist hotspot where everything's kind of like just twisted to be like the tourist aesthetic. But anyway, no, those just little, man, just like little things. And, you know, like after Dubai, you know, we went to this huge shopping mall, and I bought some like expensive like baklava, which was great. And you know, we just like found a bunch of cool little stores and putzed around. And same thing in Shanghai. Like, you know, we just, when we were done, we tried to go to some like restaurants and stuff that I usually wouldn't go to before I was competing. So it's kind of those, usually it's the 2 or 3 days after the competition, if we have any time while we're there, before I leave, that we try to like kind of cram in some fun stuff and go to like Chinatown. Well, I mean, obviously it's all China there, but there's like a market, you know, it's like a market, a little more touristy and just like cheap knickknacks, and it's fun.
Yeah. You mentioned Talking Elite there. You've done a lot of podcasts. You've been on Talking Elite a few times, and Mind Muscle Project and Loud and Live, and like, is that aspect of your career? Is that something, like, I know it goes hand in hand with the job, I guess. Is that something that you enjoy, like that kind of community outreach aspect of it, or is it something that you kind of just feel, well, I better do it?
I'd say it's a bit of both, really. I think sometimes I think something I take for granted is that I just assume, because I mean, I've been there, that a lot of people kind of know my story, right? Like, you know, when I started CrossFit and why, and what my first couple of years were like. And then I kind of, you know, I think about like my Instagram, and I'm like, oh, I gained most of my Instagram followers, you know, when I made the games, or like after I'd made the games once or twice. So I'm like, oh, like most of those people, you know, they weren't there when I like missed out on the games. And so, you know, kind of like providing that insight. And that's often something that people like want to hear more about, because it's a little more relatable. You know, when I had a full-time job, or when I was a full-time student and training, and what that kind of transition looked like, because now, you know, there's still obviously like transferable things about what I'm going through now, but it's a lot different and maybe not quite as relatable to some people. So that's something, when I go into podcasts, I try to like, you know, bring that up, I guess, if it's appropriate time to bring it up. But I do enjoy going on podcasts, but you know, it's just kind of, you just have to be mindful that it's like one more thing, right? It's just like, if you keep saying yes to, if I said yes to every single podcast invitation I was given, you know, I'd be spending 2 hours a week, and then the little time before and after prepping and so on. And it's like, oh, that ends up being quite a bit of time, you know? So, but I do enjoy it.
You mentioned like gaining followers there. Like I've kind of got I suppose, a sort of love-hate relationship with social media. Like I've got the benefit, I guess, of I've created like a kind of supportive bubble of like listeners and former guests and people who are interested in it and stuff. So I think when I step outside of that, then it gets kind of murky. Like, even I don't know if you saw, Castro shared a video of Noah Olsen saying like why he's in the Open or whatever, and just the comments on it, like, it, you know, largely say 75% supportive, but the other was just so like negative that it, like, and Noah put up a story of like a, you know, a quote in a gratitude journal, and he was like, I needed this after yesterday, like pertaining to that. And like, just like, is that like something that, I suppose, is it difficult to not get dragged into that side of thing, because when you're kind of so accessible now, and like anyone can comment on anything you put up, or can reply to anything you put up?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, I think for me, I think, you know, I've learned to create boundaries, right? Because it's like that type of continual, like you said, you know, like let's say on that post, I haven't seen that post, but I can imagine, right? If there's definitely a vocal group of people that don't like Noah, right? You know,
because he's strong and happy, and it's not fair, and it's like he's obviously faking it, or he's on steroids. Like, it has to be something. I can't be happy, so he must be faking, or I can't be strong, so he must be on steroids. Like, that's the
Yeah, it's just for whatever reason. I mean, everyone has a group of people that don't like them, and anyway. But yeah, I think you. So I guess what I give this a bit of thought, and in my normal life, like if you were, let's say, in high school or junior high, and you were bullied, like that's different. You're actually dealing with like sort of like verbal negative harassment, let's say, like in person regularly. But usually if you're in that kind of situation, and that's super negative, right? Like that can be super harmful,
Mm.
um emotionally and stuff. And so once you're usually out of that kind of high school, junior high environment, you could be in a workplace that's bullying. But so I think about my regular life, and it just doesn't really happen. And even like when I go to a CrossFit event, I'm like, people aren't like, like you suck, and I've been walking beside Noah to and from competitions, and all the time, and everyone's just like, Noah, no, like give everyone, they're just asking for autographs. So it's when you're in person, like there's that negativity doesn't really exist.
Mm.
Online, there's a lot more of it. And so you just need to develop either like boundaries or just have some very specific coping mechanisms. And like Noah, he did the journaling, which is super important, right? It's like if you're taking in, if he's going to go through and read all those comments, it's like that's going to put a damper on your mood, man. Like I don't care who you are, you're going to you have to do something. You have to mindfully do something to combat that. And that could be journaling, or having a conversation, or like, so for example, if I'm finding myself slipping into that sort of negative state, whether that's from reading a comment, or maybe I had a bad training session and I'm like, oh, I suck, I can't do this anymore, I'm no good. It's like, all right, I got to pull myself out of that by doing something very positive, writing down like 30 things that are good about what I have going on right now and who I am, and indicators that things are going well, or whatever that looks like. And I'm sure Noah has those strategies too. You have to, because I mean, part of the gig for me is putting myself out there, and try to interact with some people and answer some questions and stuff on my social media. If someone comments on my posts and asks about the shoes I'm wearing, or why my elbows are pointing out instead of in, and I might just try to respond to them, because it's a nice thing to do and kind of grows the brand a bit. But in reading those comments, I'm going to come across some that are like not so nice. And so it's not that you're like too big to hear the rumors, you just got to be too big to pay attention to them. That's a Dr. Dre reference.
I've written while we're on media, I've just written San Diego, San Diego. So like that song from the documentary series, so that almost broke my marriage at one point, where like I just be randomly walking around the house and just be like San Diego, and my wife would be like, where is that song from? Like consistently. It looked like you had fun the first time. It looked like you kind of, I guess you showed a side of yourself that people, like if people really paid a lot of attention to your social media and like caught glimpses of it in the documentaries and stuff, but it was like a full on, like, I guess, glimpse into who you are and how you get through stuff, and how you are in day-to-day life, I guess. And like the fact that you don't take yourself too seriously, which is brilliant. Like asking people, do you know who Brent Fikowski is just like,
Yeah.
it was hilarious. And then the second time, like with Pat, seemed to just ramp it up even higher to like just ridiculousness, I suppose. Like with the 80s montage, like did you come up with that, or like were you convincing them to let you do it, or did they convince you to do it?
A bit of both. Like I'd say, so the guys like behind the camera, Sam, Tyler, most of the general concepts are their ideas, and then we'll just kind of riff on them, and we'll get a bit creative. And I might send them a clip from some skit I saw, or some movie, and like here's an idea for a they might say, oh, we need an intro sequence for this episode to kind of like bridge the gap between this and this. So I'm going to give them credit that most of it comes from their brain, like the general concepts, but then we'll kind of riff on what that could look like. And then obviously like that 80s montage to start things, the general script they created. And then while we're filming, I'd be like, oh, like this, I'm doing the exercise, I'm like, oh, this would be funny, like we have this trampoline, why don't I do this, or why don't I box, or I'll use the Cheetos as like chalk dust before I do a pull up, and so but yeah, no, I'm glad that obviously that you enjoyed it, and a lot of people have. And I like someone, it's actually really insightful. Someone commented something within the last couple months on my on my Instagram or DM or something, and they're like, "Oh, you're my favorite athlete," something, and they're like, "Because you take training seriously, but nothing else,"
Yeah.
or something. And I was like, "Oh, like that's actually like pretty accurate," because I don't, when I'm training, like I don't do goofy stuff in my training. Like I don't think you could find a video of me doing like a one arm barbell snatch, because I'm like, that's dangerous. I'm not going to do it. Like there's no reason for me to do that. Like when I'm doing the exercises, the sets and reps, I take it very seriously, and then like in between I don't, and I don't even like really take, I realize how kind of ridiculous the sport is, in any sport really. I mean, like basketball is ridiculous, right? You're just like trying to put a ball in this like metal rim and there's a mesh net. It's all of it's ridiculous. So yeah, anyway, I don't know really where I was going there, but
No, but I
yeah,
think like
I'm glad you liked All In, and I'm glad that it kind of it felt as though you got an insight into me, which I think it was. I think that's kind of what we wanted, and I think it did a good job of that.
yeah, but I think even like what you're saying there about not taking certain aspects seriously while taking others seriously, like we'll get on to the professor project and stuff later on, but you can even see the like the effort that's being put into that and the professionalism that's like in the videos and in the like presentation of it. It's not just like you're not just cobbling together things being like, oh fuck it, that'll do. Like, there's obviously it, like when you need to take something seriously you can, but I think the endearing quality you have is that it's like, yeah, I'm totally fine taking the piss out of myself and out of everything around me, but not when it comes to stuff that's actually important, like, which is good.
Yeah.
I think as well, I'd be remiss in not thanking you, because usually for an interview, I have to go through like loads of different websites. I have to listen to old podcasts. I have to like watch YouTube clips for hours to gobble together stuff. You probably have the most extensive bio I have ever seen on any website. So it's like it's broken down into timelines, like subject matter. It's like I was like, I clicked onto it, be like about, oh, I want to be at in this. I was like, oh, yep, this is literally everything I would normally write down. So this is handy.
Yeah. So for those of you listening and wondering what he's talking about, I have a website which we created like 2 years ago maybe, and it needs a little bit of updating, but it's pretty well updated.
Yeah, it's quite
And
close.
there's like essentially kind of like a timeline, like a story of like my competition story.
Like a diary nearly, yeah.
It's kind of like a diary really. And the reason it was actually kind of easy to do, I sat down with someone and they just asked me questions, and I just kind of told them like year by year, and then they typed it up for me and I just read through it and I was like, yeah, that sounds good. So that's why it's so long. I was like,
Yeah.
it was just, we're like, all right, like I'm like, oh, I started this, and then they just kind of condensed it. It's very much like if we were to do an interview and talk for an hour about the progression of year zero to today.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably there's probably about 6 months that I haven't updated it since, but
Yeah, no, it was great
yeah,
for me
there's
though.
everything's in there, lots of old photos and every competition I've ever done and my
Yeah.
placing in those, and my newsletter and stuff, if you want to sign up to my weekly
Did
newsletter
you
and all that.
know those off the top of your head? Like, did you know like, oh, fifth place in this? Like, just
Mostly, yeah. I
that's
just
cool.
know that. Yeah. You
Um,
could pretty much ask every competition I've been to and I'd be like, I might not know my like exact open rank because there's like 120, whatever, but
yeah.
like in-person events, yeah, I'd know where I'd place in all of them.
Hmm. On that, so swimming in your early days and then volleyball, I suppose like soon after that, is something that like you really excelled at volleyball all the way up. Like, was sport, is that something that like were your parents kind of keen to get you involved in that, or is that something that you kind of veered towards yourself?
Yeah, they always kept me and my sister busy. So we were, I think, it's one of these things. Like one day I plan to have kids, and when I do, I'm gonna have to like kind of pick their brain about that and how they did it. I think they just tried to get us involved in it, a bunch of stuff, and then sort of as we got older, become a little more apparent in what we were interested in. And so, my sister played piano and I played guitar. They put us in different sports and we just kind of bounced around to different sports really as we grew up. And then we really kind of hooked into swimming, which we did, from kindergarten to grade 12 every summer. And it was fun because we got to, you go to these swim meets and you'd camp for the weekend and you'd do the swim meet and you'd stay for extra couple of days in the motorhome type thing. And then volleyball was something that, yeah, it was just a good fit. Like I was, taller. It's funny, as you get to college, I was a short volleyball player, but in CrossFit now I'm like the tall guy. So it's like, oh geez, can't catch a break. But yeah, it was just something I gravitated towards. There was like, really good coaching, and it just sort of suited my, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it just was a good fit. Basketball, I think there's too many moving pieces and I'm a little too high strung. And so it's just like I couldn't quite keep up. And then also the coaches and stuff like just weren't quite as good, to be honest. Like now
Yeah.
looking back, I see that at the time I didn't. And then whereas volleyball, there's a very like a pattern to it, right? Where it's very fast, but as soon as the ball moves to there to there, then there's like a very specific place you need to be.
Mm.
But you need to get there really quick. And then as soon as that happens, depending on where it goes, you either turn left or right and you move to here or here. So it's this like very fast, movement of all these pieces. And you have to make split second decisions still, like in, basketball, do I go left or right? And some of those things are up to you, but a lot of it is like, a series of plays that are audibles and stuff. And so, yeah, it just suited my personality. Something like basketball, I think was a bit too just free flowing, and I'm just a little too type A to like be relaxed enough to go with that flow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was good at rebounding, but that's about it.
You shipped out to Australia. Was that like a college exchange, or how did that come about?
Yeah, I was at a college for 2 years, and then the plan was to you kind of do 2 years of college, 2 years university for the degree that I was planning to do, which was accounting. And the plan was just to go to the university in the same city where I grew up. And then I was in college taking my university or my college degree, and they had this sort of little lunchtime presentation, and they're like, you can transfer your degree, and instead of getting a degree at the University of Lethbridge, you can get it at the University of Griffith or Griffith University in Australia. And my best friend and I were going to school there, and we thought that sounds pretty cool. So we worked for 10 months and saved up all our money. And we both had I had like a full-time job and then like 3 part-time jobs, where I was just working nonstop just to save up all the money I could. And then I moved there and got my degree in Australia, and those were the days. Probably will go down as some of the coolest days of my life for sure.
Well, when you were there, you started taking CrossFit more, like you found CrossFit, I guess, and
Yeah, found
started
it.
taking it more seriously,
Yeah.
and veered towards it over volleyball, I guess. You mentioned in your I'm going to call it an autobiography. You mentioned you mentioned in that you finished 5th in a competition in CrossFit Cross Axed. Is that like, was that sort of a crystallizing moment for you, or had you already had that kind of moment of like, I could properly do this like long term?
So there was no real like long-term vision at that point. It was just that was definitely a crystallizing moment where I was like, oh, I want to compete in this.
Hmm.
And it was around that time where I kind of learned what regionals and the open was. And then right after that competition, the coach I had, Drew Griffith, the head coach of the gym I was at, he's like, we're going to do like last year's open the next 5 weeks. So just every
Hmm.
Friday, the workout's going to be the open workout. And then we can like look at the leaderboard and see if you would have qualified, 6 months ago. I was like, oh, that sounds like a good idea. Because I still didn't really believe that I was like good enough to go to regionals. It just, I just had this kind of idea in my mind of what it was, and I wasn't there. And so we did the workouts, and I think I would have just barely qualified or like just missed out. But I was still like, I could hardly do muscle ups. Like I was doing like one at a time. And there were 1 or 2 other movements I just was really bad at. So I was like, oh, like I'm like in 6-7 months, like I can definitely do more muscle ups, and
Hmm.
I can definitely do like more chest to bars, and I can definitely increase my deadlift. So I'm like, okay, like let's do this. So then I just kind of, just started taking training more seriously. Wasn't doing as, was still playing some volleyball because I had some commitments to a team that I was playing with, but kind of did as little as possible to maintain that commitment. And then all the rest of my time that I could spare, I was pretty much at the gym and just trying to get better. And at that time, the only real goal was, do the open and then go to regionals. And I was doing a bunch of other little competitions. They had a bunch of team events and individual events every like couple weekends. I'd just, bike somewhere or drive somewhere or get a ride because I didn't have a car. And yeah, it wasn't a long-term, like I'm going to make this a career. There wasn't at all. That was not a vision at all. It was just
Did that
like,
come
I'm
at
just going
at
to,
a later point, or did it just sort of happen?
yeah, I mean, I was really kind of resistant towards it. I just didn't, I don't know. I never wanted to be a professional athlete. Like it never really was like a dream of mine, I guess. I was like, I want to have a job. Like I always enjoyed school. Like I enjoyed, working. And so, the concept of I always was doing work, and then the sport was the side passion, and
Yeah.
that was whether that was volleyball and then it came CrossFit. And so there was, it was just, I would work to make the money, and then I would spend money on my passions, which, there was a time when more of that honestly was like guitar and playing guitar and music. And then it, was between that and sport. And so at the time it was just, all my spare time, and every weekend it was just like, let's get better at CrossFit. Let's train for CrossFit. Let's, travel to a competition and get back in time to start work Monday at 9 a.m. And that was just, I was totally okay with that. And there was never like a plan to do any of that. And then, I got like a little sponsor, and I was like, oh, that's cool. I get some, free supplements. Like that'll help save me some money. Um, and then I did well enough at regionals my second year that I thought, oh, like I can actually make the games. Like if I just keep doing what I'm doing and training hard, like it's not unrealistic, which, before that I didn't really think I could,
Mm.
until there was like some very specific proof that like, and that's what always kind of, that's just how I always looked at it. And that's what always kind of I don't know if I roll my eyes, like when people say like, I want to make the games, and I'm like, okay, like, and they like haven't even been in a CrossFit gym yet, or they just started. And I'm like, man, like just like find a competition and go to it, like see if you like it, like just train 6 days a week and go to bed early and like don't do anything else, and like see if you can like live with yourself for 2-3 months, because not everyone can.
Yeah.
That's just not, they're like, well, I want to go out, have some drinks, and I want to go see this movie, and I want to go camping. I'm like, well, you can't do those things. Like, you can't go camping every weekend if you want to get better, like, because someone else isn't doing that and they're already better than you, So anyway, yeah, it was just like this very slow kind of progression. And then it got to a point where honestly, I was just so stressed out because I had so many commitments with work, because it's, tech companies were kind of like online a lot, and I was never really logging out. And then more and more opportunities to travel and compete, and more obligations from sponsors. And then I was like trying to keep up my social media game, and more training because I needed to, and there's more stress of competitions. I'm like, something's got to give, and it's going to be the job. So let's
Mm.
just go full-time athlete.
Um, you mentioned regionals. So like 2014, 2015, you missed out at the regional stage, but I guess had maybe like a very different reaction to both years, we'll say. We're 14, you were
Yeah.
kind of seemed like you had a bit of a fire lit under you, and you were like, yeah, okay, like dust myself off and go again. Whereas 15, it seemed like you were maybe in a bit more of a hole afterwards. Why do you think it was so much harder to take in 15 than 14?
It's a good question. Um, it was all just between my ears, right? So it was how I was perceiving the competition really leading up to it was what caused that. It wasn't really a difference in, you know, performance, and it wasn't because it was leading up to 2014. I was excited to compete. I just wanted to do my best. I'd kind of come off a bit of an injury, and so I was just like, hey, I'm new to this regional. I'm just going to go there and have a good time, show people what's up, like just enjoy competing. And then before I knew it, I was like, oh man, I almost made the games. And even though I was in a qualifying spot and slipped out in the last event, I was like, man, I still overperformed. Like I wasn't even really expecting to do that well. Now I really believe I can make the games, and I know this year training is going to be so much better. So like, sweet, like green grass is going to be a great year. And then as that year dragged along, by the time I got to regionals the next year, I just put a lot of pressure on myself. There's just a lot of like, you got to make it, like this is the time, like, just like a lot of kind of like really improperly focused aggression and like energy, and it just kind of wound me up. And I had like a really small injury before, but that wasn't really the reason. I was just so wound up and was just stressing myself out, like kind of some nights or some days, like just in training, like kind of on the verge of tears, because it was just like I just wanted it so bad. And yeah, then when it didn't happen, it was this feeling of like, I don't know if I can do that again, because those couple months leading up to regionals 2015 were so emotionally draining on myself and Claire, my wife now, girlfriend at the time, that I was like, I don't like, can we do that again for another year? Like, can I put myself through that like agony and that much stress to then just fail again? Because I don't know if I can do that. Like, that'll be the end of me, you know? And so that's all it was, you know, it was just the perception of, you know, the pressure related to the competition that just drove me mad, so to speak.
But how do you recover from that? Because obviously if you're doubting, say, when was regionals, like May, if you're
May, yep.
doubting yourself coming up to that, you do it, you're obviously like, you know, the end of May is a write-off just with being pissed off or disappointed. And then
Yeah.
if you're having discussions about maybe not being able to do it again, like to rebound, to qualify, like it's quite a swing, like from maybe not doing it again to qualifying. So was that something that uh you became aware of those thoughts, we'll say, quickly after 2015 and were able to work on it long term? Or was it like, now with hindsight looking back, you know that that's what the issue was?
No, I mean, I knew that was the issue, and I just didn't know what the solution was.
Yeah.
So, you know, from May, June, July, really August, kind of this, like, you know, I was considering stopping CrossFit. I was like, oh, maybe I'll, you know, become a rower, you know, like maybe I'll try to like make the Olympics in rowing or something. Or I just was, you know, I was just contemplating doing other things. It's funny, I was trying to find another sport because I still had this desire to train. Like I wasn't just going to not do a sport. I was like, well, I have to find something. And then I was still kind of training, and I think I did at least one comp, or maybe it was Olympic weightlifting comp and a CrossFit competition in like Alberta. Traveled a little bit for that, like a couple hour drive, and just started to fall in love with the training again. I'm like, oh, training's going well. Like I should probably do it. And then I was like, all right, like I need to get my head right. You know, I need to get my head right, get that figured out. So kind of like bouncing around to different things, trying to figure out what I needed to do. And I reached out to my this will always be like a very light bulb kind of defining moment when I look back at all this CrossFit stuff I've done. And I sent a message to my old high school volleyball coach, Ard Bishevel. And so he was really big on mental training. Like we would be in a classroom twice a week with our volleyball team, like doing mental training stuff. And kind of like Phil Jackson would do with the Bulls, that sort of thing. And I remember, man, I could probably pull it up. I mean, I'm sure it's still on Facebook, but I messaged him somewhere along the lines of like, hey, you know, like gonna make another push this year, and I want to make sure this year, like, there's no doubts. Like, I know we have the physical stuff. Like, it's gonna get there. I just need to go into this next competition with no doubt that that I can win. You know, any tips, any advice? And he just sent me a screenshot of a quote from a book by Joshua Medcalf, Chop Wood, Carry Water. And it was this long quote, and I'll kind of paraphrase it, but it was about surrendering the outcome. And so it's like the person who surrenders the outcome and knows that they could win or lose, or the warrior that knows in battle he could win or die, actually has the greatest chance of survival and has the greatest chance of victory, because they're freeing themselves to just perform at their best instead of, you know, spending, you know, any sort of energy on trying to control, you know, the end outcome, over which they really have no control. The only thing they have control over is their actions in each moment.
Is this did you put this up on your in your gym yesterday on the?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
on the board, yeah. So I'll write different quotes on there, and you know, I'll just change them every couple of weeks. And that was just one that was coming up, and very serendipitous. We're going this direction. A lot of podcasts go in this direction, which is fine. I guess I drag them there, but and yeah, I remember feeling that and just feeling like relieved, because, you know, I was trying to convince myself that I needed to have this like unwavering belief, like I'm gonna win, like there's nothing that, like there's no way. But I didn't believe that. Right, it was like there's too much. I'm like, well, I haven't won the last 3 times. And you know, and like you know, there's this, obviously, no matter how good you are, there is always a possibility you might not win, right? And so I just like, I was struggling with this, like this conflict. There was this conflicting idea in my head of like, well, I have to believe I can win at all costs. But then there's on the other side, I'm like, well, that's not actually true. And so when I read this, it was like, oh, that's like exactly what I needed to hear, and it makes a lot of sense. And and it was what we did in high school. I just had lost sight of that over the years.
Like success obviously followed then. So like fourth, second, and fourth. Like, when those moments occur, so if you have those kind of dips after, like, we'll say almost succeeding, you know,
Mm.
success is relative, I suppose, but like almost succeeding, almost getting your goal of going to the games, and then you go fourth, second, fourth. Like when those happen, is there a danger of the opposite there, of like having to be immediately faced with having to either repeat or better what you've just done, or does that thing of like surrendering the outcome carry through with that? And you know, is that ever something you struggle with, say, the other side of things?
Oh yeah. I mean, every couple days or weeks or months, you slip out of the ideal. I'm still on the journey of like trying to harness the ideal mindset 24/7, 365, right? And so there
Mm.
definitely been, we could go competition by competition since, so let me put it this way. 2016 regionals, when I qualified, that was a very good competition for me. For those, like, I was in the flow state or the zone for every single workout.
Mm.
I executed all my strategies to perfection. I either matched or beat all my training times. I got no reps. I think my event placings of the 7 workouts, it was something like second, third, first, fourth, first, third, or something. Like, they were just like awesome. And then I was going into the games. They do like the combined regional leaderboard, and I think I was going into the games ranked like 6th or 7th or
Mm.
something in the world. And so it was like, I at that particular competition was like, as far as mindset goes and like performance relative to my absolute best, it was like right near the tippy top. And so since then I've competed, 20 times or something, and each one has been, some have been up there, right up there, matching that one, and others from a mental standpoint have been not so great. And you try to just keep it, I've made mistakes. Right? And I've just made mistakes, and sometimes most of the time, honestly, they're not always correlated to like, the final position. Like, there's some competitions where I placed, I've won or I've come second or something. And it's like, oh, like Brent did well. Whereas, mentally looking back, I'm like, I was a wreck. Like, that was it was bad. Um, where, and there's inverse where it's like, man, I was really happy with, like, I performed well relative to my max, and I, was in a good headspace, and I was consistent. And then the performance, like on paper, like, I placed whatever 5th or something, it was kind of, or 10th or whatever it was. And you're just kind of like, oh, it didn't really, and that's just how it is. So I'm just trying to, like, this year I'm hopefully older and wiser, and I feel like I can really I feel like I'm on track to put myself in the right place this year,
Uh,
but I'll have to kind of wait and see.
I heard an interesting story about the 2018 games where CrossFit kicked you off your scooter and wouldn't let you.
Yeah. So when you're at the games, you walk so much. So I was only in California once, and looking back now, I'm like looking back, and everything was really quite close for the athletes. Like, you were very, very protected from the fans. So you had this like athlete tent, like air conditioned, and you walk right out, and then there was a warm up area, and then you just kind of like go down like a hall, and you're right in the tennis stadium, or you go down like a little bit longer and you're on the grass, the soccer
Mhm.
stadium. And along both of those, there was no fans. In Madison, I get there year one, 2017, and you walk forever. You walk like a mile. So you have the athlete area to warm up, and then our warm up area, which is shared with, the masters, the teenagers, the teams of 4, lots of event staff. So, there's quite a few people in the warm up area, and sometimes you get people taking a photo, but they like try to get people not to do that. It's fine. Do that. And then they're like, they marshal you, and they're like, let's go. And then we walk. It's like the freaking Hobbit. And you you walk like down this thing, and then there's like, you're past the parking lot, so people are there asking for photos, and you kind of go like in this private area, and then you go up the staircase and down the staircase, which is right where you enter. If you've been to the games in Madison, there's like, the entryway, and you scan your badge, and people are waving at you, getting signatures. You come down, they like parade you past the beer garden, and then like down this hallway, down this other hallway, and then you're like around all these like tents and the first aid, and like around inside the stadium, like on the bottom, and then you're at another warm-up area. So you're walking for, I don't even know, it's quite a bit. Like, it's fine. I don't mind doing it. And so I brought a scooter the next year, just a little push scooter, put some Zevia stickers on it, just like a $50 scooter. And my plan was just to scoot. and like, pick it up off the stairs. And I'm like, oh man, this is great. Instead of walking like 10 miles, I might walk like 4. Just save the legs. And they're like, yeah, no, like you're not allowed to do that. All right. So anyway, that's
good.
the Scoot story. I thought it was a really good idea, and someone gave me a hard time. That was Bridges, Josh Bridges. He looks and he goes, millennials, which was really funny. And then he's like, I'm grumbling about it. I'm like, hey. And then someone else, I forget who it was. I don't want, yeah. And they're like, man, like, it's honest, it's a pretty smart idea. Like, I mean, yeah, it's a little dorky and like a little wussy, whatever. It's like we walk a lot, and you finish some workout that's all squats, and they're like, no time to cool down. You got to go back. Oh my gosh, you're just like walking with sore quads for like 2K or whatever it is. Pretty funny. So scooter would have been nice, but they didn't have to use it.
In 2019 and 2020, then obviously like radically different. So 2019, I suppose, because the number of entrants and then the system, like the cuts and stuff. Did you enjoy that game's like any of it, or was it like did you like, what are your, say, residual feelings from it?
Um, I think the best way to look at that is, if I could do it all again, would I still go? It's like, yes. So then in that way, I did enjoy it.
Yeah.
Now, you have to understand that as a whole, like, most CrossFit competitions aren't enjoyable.
Yeah.
It's a lot, like competing in volleyball is fun, right? Like it is. It's genuinely like fun. Like, yeah, there's pressure, which can, it's not like we're living in Syria, right? And it's like, it's fine. But CrossFit competitions as a whole, like, they're not particularly fun. There's little moments, and it's satisfying, and there's a feeling of like fulfillment when you accomplish them. And there are some that are more fun than others, but the game isn't particularly fun. I don't think anyone can really say like, oh, there's so much. It's not really. But that year in particular, I would say was, the least enjoyable. And I think, I mean, I even spoke to some people that made the top 10, and I'm not going to put words in any specific athletes' mouths, but, there were how many, 150 men, 150 women. I don't think anyone enjoyed the event really. Like, it wasn't really, there was no time to soak it. Like, every event was announced right before you did it. And so, like, as a spectator that was there, people had no idea what was going on. As an athlete, there was no like kind of like downtime usually in the other. And I'm sounding like I'm complaining here, right? But I'm just giving people an example of what this is like. So typically at the games, you arrive pretty early in the morning. You might have like a briefing, and then you kind of know how the day is laid out, and most of the events are announced. And so you have some time just to like sit down, eat some food. Maybe there's like an hour or two break where you can actually just like sit down, chum with the boys, maybe watch the girls heat on the TV, and then warm up and whatever. And the games in 2019, they're like, we have to go to a briefing. I'm like, we're here? Like, no, over there. I'm like, all right, like, when do we start the next event? Like, after the briefing. Like, well, what do I need to bring? Like, how long will we be there? Bring everything. So you bring like your cooler, you bring all your shoes because you don't know what you're doing. And then you get there and it's like, oh, it's handstand walks, burpees. And you're like, why do I have my weightlifting shoes? And like, all like, you bring your food for the day because you're like, they don't tell you how long you're going to be there. And it was just like that every day, which, I don't know. I mean, maybe someone would say, oh, unknown and unknowable, like ready for anything. And I'm like, is it though? Like, is that? So it just from all that logistics, and then all the people getting cut and that kind of confusion around that. And obviously some frustration. It was just kind of done in a flash. And like, obviously, like, I was training to compete for full games. Like, no one went there planning to get cut. And so, I finished a couple events, and like, I think my lats and my legs were a bit sore, and I'm like, all right, well, I guess that's my year is done. And it just was just kind of like, meh, so it's just, I'd do it all again, right? I'd still go, and it's, obviously little things I'd change. I probably ideally wouldn't have fallen on my face in the handstand walk, among other little changes. But it's like, it wasn't really, to be fair, like, most competitions aren't like enjoyable in like the typical sense of when a competition is enjoyable. But even from a satisfaction standpoint, it didn't leave you feeling very satisfied. Obviously, I got cut. But even I think for a lot of people that did get cut, or sorry, finish in the top 10, I I think it was still this feeling of like, that was a weird event, right? That
Mm,
wasn't really what I was training for, like you're training for what you've seen previously. And because there's no rules describing what it is you're training for, you just train based on the average of the last couple of years. And then when it's all done, you're like, yeah, like that, even if you finish in the top 10, you're like, yeah, that was like, good. I finished top 10. That's sweet. Got to do the whole weekend. But I still think it was just, it's like, this was kind of weird, like a
mm,
little like anti-climatic.
yeah.
But
The next year, then obviously huge chance for redemption, and like to you know make hay again and have a great season, and then COVID
yeah.
lands. But obviously not before you stood tall in Dubai. I was kind of curious, the year before you went to China, which seemed like, I don't know, like, a thoughtful choice, maybe like a considered option when it came to sanctionals, of like, where could I go and where is a good route to, to guarantee qualification. Whereas Dubai is like, it seems like a lot more of like I want to really challenge myself and like see, like, was that the idea behind it? Like, to have a totally different kind of feeling towards it?
I'd say yes. So I mean, when 2019 leading up to the games, the rules were changing, and it was a big mystery on what the season was going to be. Even kind of like as it started, there wasn't really a lot of information, and so we're just trying to figure it out. And I think I don't even honestly remember the exact criteria on which I decided to go to China. It was definitely part of it was, I assumed that the competition there might be not as steep. And I'm like, well, if you have to win an event, like that's how you get to the games,
Hmm.
then I'm like, well, that's my goal. My primary purpose is to just make it to the games. And then when I get there, be at my best. I'm like, well, statistically speaking, if you go to a competition where there's probably not as many athletes at your level, you're probably going to win. So it was like, it was part of that. And then I had like some contingencies with Granite Games, and there was even another event, I don't even remember which one it was now, that I'd go to again if that didn't work. Um, and yeah, and then I think after that, I think part of the rationale was, I was like, man, like, we don't know what the games is going to look like in 2020. Like it could be, you know, the same, like cuts. And so I'm like, I need to use this fitness that I have and enjoy some like peak competition experiences with against the best guys, and try to, essentially try to get that like satisfaction that you get from the CrossFit games somewhere else, because I
Hmm.
might not get it again next year, even if, no matter how fit I am. And and I needed to be better in 2019, right? Like, the cuts and the programming or whatever. It's like the more athletes, yeah, like it obviously wasn't like what we're used to seeing, but I still needed to be a better athlete and perform better based on my abilities. But anyway, so yeah, really after the games, I'm like, all right, I got to put myself out there. Like, let's go to the biggest, baddest event that comes up kind of first. And it was Dubai. And then I was going to go to West Coast Classic, which also had a really stacked lineup. Obviously COVID canceled that. And I think I was maybe going to go to one more, which would have also been a pretty big event. So yeah, I just wanted to just kind of like, just put it out there, and yeah, let it all hang out and have a good time and see where I stood. And I look back at the programming from the last few years of Dubai, and I thought, yeah, like it's a lot. It's very games-esque, but it's also like still up my alley. Like I'm not
Yeah.
like going there to I'm not going there to lose. Like I look at those events and I think, oh, I could have placed really well in a lot of the previous Dubai competitions. So let's do it.
And then, like, obviously you're high on, you're high on ability anyway, and then you're high on confidence. Like, your, you know, ego has been massaged by standing on top of the podium and stuff. You must be feeling pretty good. Like, is it hard to stomach then that the format changes to the games and everything changes so much when it's something that's so totally out of your control?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of learn to live with that in this sport. Um, like people ask me like in years prior, like, what do you think the open workout's going to be? And I'm like, I don't waste my time with that. Like, like literally, I'm like, probably burpees. I don't know, something with a dumbbell or a barbell. Like, I just and because it's just not. You just have to really release that. And I have a very, everything I do, I try to have a good reason for it and a rationale for it. And so if there's ever, if I'm deeply involved in something, like I am with the sport of CrossFit, and I see some decision and I'm like struggling to find how someone made that decision. Obviously that's like kind of frustrating, which is how I felt at times about aspects, not all of it, but aspects of like, let's say the 2019 games, where I kind of looked at that and I'm just like, I don't, if I'm thinking of like why you hold this competition and who the stakeholders are and how it grows, and just all these little things, I'm just like, I still don't understand why certain things were done this way. Like for example, the events being announced, every single event being announced just before it happened. I struggled to find like a strong rationale why that's necessary, when there are other options, which would be to announce them sooner than that. And that's not even from like an athlete frustration standpoint, because it's like, like we're all dealing with it. It's not even parody. It's just like from a spectator standpoint, people in the audience didn't know what the event was when it was starting. And because the internet there isn't never very good, so they're like watching people do a bunch of things, and you're like, I don't even know what I'm watching right now.
Yeah.
Like I don't know how to keep up with this, and like that's not a good idea. But what were we talking about? Yeah, can it be? It is. Yeah, I mean, is it frustrating? I mean,
suppose
yes, but you just get over it.
The things you've laid out there are like, if you can't understand why the decision is being made, it's annoying. But obviously, it's plain why the decision was made to move the stage 1 online and that kind of thing.
Oh
like,
yeah,
so it's obviously easier to stomach then when you're like, oh, I totally understand why that was done, as opposed to like, what are you doing that for?
Yeah, I mean, and the constant changes to the games was definitely frustrating. This year, COVID year 2020, I mean, I booked and canceled 3 accommodations, right? In the summer of 2020. Oh, it's going to be here, so we had something booked and we canceled it, and we booked something else as soon as we heard news. And we were like ahead of things, like we were kind of trying to be like very proactive. And so, had I been like a little more, and again, I didn't really lose much money booking and canceling, but it's just to kind of give an indication of how often it was changing. Like I had enough reason to believe I needed to book this accommodation, so I did, and then I had to cancel it when it changed, and did that I think 3 times, along with some flights and stuff. So yeah, it was a lot of changing, but I don't think there's any other way to really do it. They had to move quick and try and salvage something for the season, which I'm grateful that they salvaged something. And it was definitely like, I mean, that's all that we were doing as athletes for those couple months, was just like trying to obviously train, but then also like figure out like, what am I training for and when is it happening and how do I get there, and legally and COVIDly. It's a lot. It was a whole aspect that it's your like the logistics side of that you're, as an athlete, it's not written in the job description, but it became part of what was required.
Last summer as well, it also saw the advent of the PFA, which is something that I suppose, like, was that something that I know you were heavily involved in its inception, we'll say. Is that something that you saw the need for, like, as in something that was lacking when you started back 2013, 2014, or was it like specifically a reaction to you say the games last year, all the kind of storm last summer, or like 2019, like that whole, uncertainty and just, I suppose, wrongdoing, or was it a more of a case of like seizing an opportunity because of the uncertainty to start something?
A little bit of both. It's definitely something that's been talked about for a long time. There's not really, and it's so the Professional Fitness Athletes Association. It's kind of like an athlete union, but it's not a union because we're not employees. And that's the goal, is to just have the athletes unified, the voice unified, and just improve health and safety and working conditions. Although again, we're not a union, to just kind of help have a centralized voice for some athletes, so we can provide our insight to any competition, whether it's a CrossFit Inc. competition or otherwise. It's honestly, it's slow moving. It's not moving as fast as I would like, based on the standards of how I like things to move. Just because everyone that's involved is an athlete, and we're all really busy, right? I'd love it to be progressing more, and there's like some cool ideas of things we can do, but it's still moving, slow. It's still there. We've got some plans, and I hope to have like more and better information and things happening in the coming months, in the coming year. But it's just moving slow. Yeah, there's always been a need for it, because I mean, well, I mean, simply put, like the sport doesn't really have any rules.
Yeah.
So, like there's a rule book that CrossFit Inc. has, and obviously sports are different to brands, right? So the NBA is different to the sport of basketball. They have slightly different rules, depending on the federation and so forth. But there's no rules right now really on, like what is a competition, right? Or like what are the movements that you can put in a competition, right? So I mean, I think there's just a lot of opportunity to tighten some things up, and I think the athlete's voice can help that. Yeah.
It seemed like the day after that was announced, or that came to light, that CrossFit put a council together of athletes, with like an athlete advisory council. Like, did that kind of, in your eyes, like do some of the work for you, or do you think it made it more important that the PFA continue to try and do work, if you know what I mean?
Oh no, so we were kind of in touch with them when that was happening, and no, I liked what they did there, and I think it was great. And the athlete advisory council that they have, the 4 athletes were all non-competing, and so I think they could be a little more open and just open with them about certain ideas, because obviously with a sport that's changing as much as this one is, if like, let's say, someone from the sport called up me and they're like, oh, here's a bunch of ideas we have and here's directions we might put them, that kind of puts me potentially in a bit of an advantage, knowing where the sport might go. And so having athletes that aren't competing and being able to like divulge some more kind of a like exclusive and information is just a lot easier. So yeah, no, I think it's a good thing. I mean, any time that I don't, obviously being part of the PFAA, I'd love it to to be successful and to grow. But if everything's improving and the athletes' voices are being heard and stuff, if it's not the PFAA, like I don't care. Right?
Yeah.
It doesn't really rock my boat. It's I just want it. It's not like it's definitely not like an ego thing. It's just I just want things to be better. That's all it is, right? And if that gets done, however that gets done, if they bring in consultants from previous other similar sports and like create new rules or implementations that are of learnings from other sports, like I don't know, golf and whatever, track and field or something, and create like a system. And even if it's different to what we're used to, or it's just codifying what we've kind of come to expect, in sort of like a gentleman's rule type situation, and they just actually write down those gentleman's rules. Or if it's brand new and even if it's like bad for me as an athlete, I'm like, I don't care, as long as it's just improvement in the direction of like professionalism, consistency, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So, that's all it's about.
Speaking of good for you, bad for you, so Matt Fraser retired.
Oh yeah.
I think that caught a lot of people off guard. Is it? I was curious, as a fellow competitor, is it a relief to see like someone that good go, or does it ramp up pressure where it's like, well, shit, now I have no excuse. If like my excuse always was, well, obviously I didn't win in 2019, like Matt was there, obviously I didn't win. If he's gone, does it ramp up pressure, or is it like, the reins are let loose?
It really depends on who you are. So, Matt. Oh yeah. So the day that he retired, I was in the gym. I think I was on a call, FaceTime with my coach, and my wife comes in. She said, "Brent," I'm like, yeah. She said, "Matt retired." I went, "What? No." And I thought she meant Matt O'Keefe, my manager, and I was a little panicked. She's like, "Read the Instagram post." And I was like, "Oh crap! What are we gonna do?" Like, Matt's super helpful. And then I look, I'm like, "Oh, it's Fraser. Yeah, that makes sense." And I'm like, "I gotta get back to training." Like, I don't. And so like I've had a conversation. It's obviously, as a competitor. Like, I mean, if Matt wasn't there, I would have been the world champion in 2017, right? Or I would have been on the podium, I guess, and that would have been third 2 years in a row as well. So like not having him there obviously increases the statistical likelihood of someone else winning, because he can't if he's not there. And I'm, one of those guys that's in that conversation, whether it's one of the 5 or 20 or whatever number you choose, that I think I'd be in that conversation. But if it really changes anything, I think you probably need to look at what you're doing before. Like I had a thought about that, and I'm like, oh, is there anything really that, like, knowing that now, is it like what, and I had a chat with my wife and my coaches later, a couple days later, and we were just like, oh, like, you know, and we're just like, I don't like, we're doing everything, you know, like there's not, it doesn't really change anything. I mean, I'm always like trying to find those 1%, right? Like trying to sharpen the saw and just think of one more little thing. And I'm like, yeah, I've got, you know, format retired. Like I had a little list of things I was kind of digging into and trying to improve on, whether it was mindset or sleep or nutrition or, you know, some little training hack or some video on how to foot position for squat or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, none of that really like functionally changes.
Yeah.
So I mean, it depends on the person, but for me, I mean, yeah, I don't know. I think, yeah, it just depends on the person. I'm sure some people will maybe, yeah, it might stress them out more because the likelihood of them winning is, you know, maybe become more of a reality or something, and so they might kind of stress themselves out. For others, I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I was texting the group chat with him and Vellner, and he texted us today a photo of him on the beach. He said, "Hope training's going well, boys." Giving us a hard time. And we were like, "Yeah, it's like pretty cold here right now." Sent us a picture of, you know, the temperature or whatever. So yeah, no, I'm happy for him. I'm stoked for him. But yeah, it doesn't
It's well
really.
deserved, in fairness.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, he's moving on to other things, and
Can
yeah,
you see
definitely.
a level of like that level of dominance again, or do you think that as the sport like continues to grow, that that type like the Froning and the Fraser dominance will become less likely because there'll be a larger pool, or you know?
I think. I think there's this, and again, like I've only really been consuming media the last like whatever, you know, since I've been a teen, like 11, or even sports media for the past 10 years. There's a lot of like, it seems like people talk about like greatest of all time and legacy a lot, last little bit more than I used to remember. I
Yeah,
don't
no,
know,
I'd
maybe,
agree. No, I'd agree with that.
would you think so? Yeah,
Yeah,
okay. And so in order to win five, you got to start with one.
yeah,
Do you know what I mean? And like you know, like Super Bowl, I didn't end up watching it. I watched like a little bit of it. You know, it was Mahomes and Brady. And all they were talking about is like, well, Mahomes needs to win this if he wants to win seven. And, you know, he's 6 away. And if he does, and they're like, guys, like, dude's like 24 years old. Like, just let him play. You
yeah,
know, like, we don't know, like, oh, if he wants to be considered the greatest of all time. I'm like, well, yeah, like, obviously he would love to be considered the greatest quarterback of all time. But I mean, he's got practice tomorrow. You know, like, it's like he's largely, a lot of that is out of his control. Like, he needs to have a good team. He needs to have a good competition schedule, you know, good refing, all that stuff. It just needs to all line up. And so for someone like Tom Brady, who's won 7 Super Bowls, it's like, that's awesome. Like, that is crazy. And it could happen again, or it might never happen again. Like, I mean, Wayne Gretzky has the most points combined of assists and goals, and it'll probably never be broken. Or like, you know, there's some records, or like, who's the other guy? I think it was Brett Favre, most consecutive starts as a quarterback in the NFL. It's just some stupid number. And so yeah, with Fraser, I mean, like, I don't know. I mean, the sport first of all has to be around
mm,
another 5 years for there to be another 5-time consecutive champion at a minimum. And then, you know, it's like let's worry about that. You know, like and I think it's definitely possible. Is it likely? I mean, like, no, but also yes. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
it's
No,
not
I
it's
get
not
you.
it's not easy to it's not easy to win a world championship in any sport 5 years in a row,
Yeah,
but it's been done in plenty of sports. And I think that's probably the more apt way to look at it, is like, you know, we have such a small pool of data. Like, I remember people drawing conclusions about like, you know, no CrossFit Games champion has ever won the games if they at first didn't come top 7 in the Open the 2 years prior. And I'm like we have like, and this was back in like 2013. I'm like, yeah, we've only been doing this for like 5 years, guys. Like, you can't draw like correlations in this data yet. It's just a little early. um, you know, or it'd be like, you know, when Rich was winning a lot, it's like, you know, the last 4 years, if if you don't have a tattoo on your left bicep, stats show you can't win the games.
if your
Well,
initials are
yeah,
ORF, yeah,
yeah, you know. And so anyway, I mean, I could go on and on, but needless to say, I do think it's definitely possible that someone could win 5 in a row, or just 5 in total. Um, it's statistically unlikely, especially in a sport that is dynamic,
mm,
is as dynamic as this one. But I think it could still happen. I mean, I'm here for another 5 years, so we'll see. You know, but you know, there's nothing I can or anyone can really do about that, other than like, you know, I got to train this afternoon.
Yeah. You're you're a diligent chap, I'd wager. So like, I can't imagine you don't have a plan in place, like long term for yourself when you hang up your nanos. Is the professor project and train your weakness, is that like an avenue that you think you want to explore more as you go on, like coaching and improving other people?
That's a good question. And then, you know, what's funny is this is probably the one of the first times in my life that I don't feel like I have a really long-term plan post hanging up the nanos. There's a bunch of little things, and most of them I'll kind of keep private for now. But yeah, I plan to keep those going for sure. Like as long as people are enjoying it, and you know, I've got a good staff of people right now that help me with those companies, and yeah, it's a lot of fun. Like I enjoy doing that, and I enjoy helping people. And both of those companies are, yeah, it's a lot of fun making that stuff. And I appreciate that you mentioned that you feel there's like a, I try to provide something that's, you know, a little better, not better, but it's nice that you noticed that there's, you know, it's like done in a very like particular way. You know, it wasn't just, it's not just something I'm like desperately trying to throw together to make a couple bucks. I try to be pretty like thorough with it. Yeah, and I think that that'll be part of what I consider doing when I'm retired from competing, which will be anywhere from, you know, 1 month to 10 years. I don't really know
Well,
yet.
you just
And
said
just
at
take
least
take
5 years from now.
yeah. Yeah, I don't really know yet, right? I'm turning 30 at the end of this month. But you know, I feel as good as I ever have, to be honest. Like, I mean, I've had a stretch of, gosh, I don't even know how many months without any like real injuries, and I
Mm.
can't. It's, you know, you just learn so much about your body that we'll see. But yeah, no, honestly, as far as what I'm doing after, yeah, there's a lot of little things I'm considering. Some within fitness and CrossFit, and some not at all. So we'll just kind of wait and see.
I thought it was interesting, like Fraser said it, or kind of alluded to it, I guess, about that like feeling of always being on and always training scared and like that kind of anxiety, I guess. And I spoke to Marcus Philly last week, and he was saying something similar, that like when he retired, when he quit like competing, he just had this moment of like, oh my God, like it's that monkey's off my back. Like, is that, are you aware of that? Like, are you kind of, you know, is your back up a lot? And like, you know, when you get that maybe month off, or you can you actually relax when you know you have to go back into it again?
Yeah, I can never fully relax because even when I'm like taking a month off training, you know, you're still not like, you know, I'm still like mindful of when I go to bed, and I'm still like mindful of getting a good night's sleep and doing a couple little sleep things and eating healthy. You know, there's like, it's a very different existence to like even like high performance from like a business standpoint. Let's say you want to be like an entrepreneur, and you know, because you're an entrepreneur, you can literally like, you know, take a 3-day vacation, no internet, and literally not be doing anything that directly helps you with your company, and just eat whatever you want, stay up late, go to bed, whatever, whatever. And then, you know, you just, as long as you like show up and get back on your laptop and have a bit of clarity, then you're back to work. And that was a good 3 days off. But you can't really, I mean, you like, don't get me wrong, you can do that as an athlete, but like I don't.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't think that most athletes that are trying to perform at a high level can really, truly, truly like, you know, be off. I mean, some can. I'm not hardwired that way. Like I
Yeah.
just can't. I've tried, and it's just not even worth. It's not worth like trying, and then I don't want to either. It's not like
Yeah.
I want to just eat terrible and like, you know, intentionally do stuff that's. So yeah, there's definitely that. And so I think that the challenge then is trying to take as much off the plate as you can, so that, you know, there is that kind of lingering guy on your shoulder, whatever. And then obviously the training is very intense and very focused. And then it's about like, well, in between those training sessions and on the rest days and the deload weeks, it's like, can you actually like try to switch off as much as possible and just like read a book,
Yeah. Yeah.
put your feet up and read a book, you know, because that's part of it. You know, it's why a lot of like NBA players or whatever, they just play video games all day in between training because they're just trying to switch off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned in your on your website about how Wadapalooza on a team was one of your favorite competing moments. Is that something that you think you might consider again? Uh, you know, when you're in the autumn of your competitive years, maybe.
I mean, the answer that's pretty short. Like, we'll see. I would say if I had to say yes or no right now, I'd probably say no.
Yeah.
I think if I wanted to, but it's definitely not out of the question. I think if I wanted to do team, I would either like, do it just for fun, throw together some people I like, and we just do it, which would be super enjoyable. But if I wanted to actually like commit to it, I'd have to move, or I'd have to get people to move to me if I wanted it to be the caliber that's similar to my level, which I don't see myself wanting to like uproot and like make that kind of commitment right now for team, just based on, it just doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, based on like what the competition looks like. And then not to mention that, like in a very like broad strokes, not to like, I believe I'm capable of a lot, but if you look at what the team competition looks like, because I'm taller, if I had a team of men and women that were all short,
You're
and
carrying the worm on your own, basically.
Well, yeah, with the worm and the synchro movements, it just doesn't make sense. Like it just, as an individual, like, I just need to not stop.
Yeah.
Right. Like, it's like, oh, you suck at handstands. It's like, yeah, like, but if I just don't stop, then I'll be just fine. Like I can do fine in a lot of, but it's different when you're trying to do a synchro, touch and go deadlift, and the person's, a foot shorter than you. It's like, that's a problem. And you can't, there's nothing you can like technique away, or like fitness away from that. So yeah, I mean, short answer is like, it's definitely, I never write something off like that, because there could be some cool opportunities, but I don't really see it. It's definitely not like on the forefront of like, oh, that's the next thing.
Yeah, that's fair.
But maybe, I'm never going to say no to that. But
look, we'll finish with a quick fire.
Yeah.
I'm conscious of the time for you. So they're mostly either or, I think. So row or ski?
Row.
Swim or volleyball?
Volleyball.
Bench or squat?
Squat.
Snatch or clean?
Snatch.
Gymnastics or cardio?
Gymnastics lately. Been enjoying it. Yeah.
And favorite Zevia flavor?
Grape or the kids flavor, the strawberry lemonade, I think it's called, with Mickey on
it. When you said kids flavor, I was just imagining one flavored like a kid. I was like, this is bizarre.
No, toddler flavor. No, they're like made for kids, are these little ones. I haven't had that flavor in a bit, but yeah, I'm pretty sure it's fruit punch. That's what it's the fruit punch one. It's the red one with Mickey. Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah. Well, listen, thanks a million again. This has just been surreal. It's been great. I really appreciate you coming on. And best of luck with everything, all your competitive and personal endeavors long term. I really always want the best for you, so I hope that whatever happens this year works out in your favor.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this year. Hopefully COVID will allow me to compete in person. That would be, that's all I really want, to be honest. I just loved how, even without spectators, but I'm also very aware that, that might not happen for quite a while. So, but yeah, other than that, man, I appreciate you having me on the podcast. I enjoyed it a lot, and enjoyed the questions, and hopefully enjoyed the answers. So.
Cheers, man. Enjoy the rest of your day.
All right. Thanks. See ya.
Thanks, Brent. See you later. Thank you.